Welcome, everyone, to the DCD broadcast for the Stoltz Innovation Day. And what an absolute pleasure. You have got to join us for every single session. We're right at the start. We're looking at scaling data centers in a resource-constrained world. And I think this is a great topic at this time because, let's be honest, we're seeing massive growth, another gigawatt data center campus being built, more extensions. But how do we even scale responsibly while ensuring resiliency, reliability, flexibility? How do we do it? And at the same time, how do we gain these capacity partnerships to develop things faster, redefining the entire relationship amongst everybody? And I cannot say what a great group of people that deal with this question right now. Much appreciation to the Stoltz for putting this on for this great innovation day. And I've got to say, Zach Pena, you're the CEO of Emprix Partners, an absolute pleasure. Andrew Lindsay, CEO and co-founder of FlexNode, wonderful. Tom Zadera, Dalidas Industrial, absolutely critical. You've seen it so many times. You know what's going on in this industry. Just beautiful. And of course, Brian Hatmaker, you're the president of Stoltz. And with that, I've got to say, Zach, can we start with you? Because you've seen this so much. And I've got to say, quick introduction of yourself. Tell us a little bit about the company itself, because Emprix Partners is fantastic. Then what are your thoughts about it? What are clients saying? What are you seeing? What's going on here, my friend? Tell us, Zach.
Yeah, more than happy. Thanks for having me. So Zachary Pena, CEO of Emprix Partners. We are a strategic sourcing and procurement advisory specifically for the mission critical space, right? So predominantly data centers, but we do other mission critical applications, but really coming to market and helping our partners, which are normally the owner operators, developers, think through things strategically so that they can deploy at scale, to our point, under the lens of supply chain. So the market's crazy, like you said. And it's never a dull moment. Great time to be alive. There's gold all over the ground, but you need great partners to help you pick it up, right? So we attempt to be that great partner, going through these very interesting, we'll call them supply and market-led events that are, I think, driving us all up the wall in some instances, but also allowing for great opportunity and great partnerships to be established throughout the overall market.
Zach, I got to ask you a big question here, and that is, you mentioned right up front, crazy times. The speed's out of control, I would almost say at one point. Am I right or wrong? Are your clients seeing the same thing? Zach, slow it down. How?
I mean, I try to grab the world and slow it down, but my inner Marine makes me think that I can. But at the end of the day, we're all pushing up this giant hill, and we're all trying to climb Mount Everest. Basically at a sprint pace, right? And we're, around amazing people that are probably the smartest I've ever seen in the industry. But we're doing a lot of crazy things. We're breaking some stuff, which is okay, right? But we're maturing rapidly in this environment, not only as individual companies, individual people, but also as partners as well. And so trying to figure out how to do that together has been the greatest challenge of them all. But that's why we have the great people like they do on this phone.
I love how you said that, Zach. You got to bring it together. Zach, I got to come back to you because one of the things that you've always spoken about is scheduling success, scheduling getting it right, and having the right partners. I love that. Andrew, can I turn to you, please? I've got to. Because quite honestly, FlexNode, boy, you're seeing this all the time and dealing with customers happily. You're always there with a smile ready to help. What's going on? What do you tell us about you, the company, but more importantly, what are you hearing these days? What's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew Lindsay, co-founder and CEO of FlexNode. We design, deliver, and operate highly configurable, high-density, liquid-cooled modular data centers, really focused on being an alleviating factor to what we see as a major workforce problem in the industry today. Looking at that specifically, what we're seeing is an exponentially increasing level of demand year over year, far beyond what the industry was in a position to take on. And so we really need to start taking different approaches to deliver the kind of capacities that are in demand today. I think we're also seeing a large shift in the way that we are deploying that capacity from a product perspective, and the level of flexibility that's required from the product as well as from the customer to really align on the demands that are coming down the pike. And we're seeing, hundreds of megawatts within the 12-month range, right? First off, I think we all need to sort of sit down and hit reality a little bit. But on the other side is what kinds of conversations need to be had earlier. And it's with groups like this that really allow for us to have those kinds of conversations.
I got to come back. You said it, Andrew. New creative requirement. This is so new. Are there new ways of thinking, new ways of delivering? I'm getting back to you, Zach, with that scheduled success, my friend. But I got to ask, this is all new. I mean, isn't this even more confusing for people? And they're coming to you more and more for help. New, Andrew, help me. How do you deal with that?
Well, a big part for us is highlighting that it's configurations more than it is customization for us. When it comes to what the options are, we don't like to be a limiting factor for our customers. So we are not going to just give you, say, 4 or 5 reference architectures and say, fit it in that box. But at the same time, we do have so many different Lego configurations that we allow for those customers to really leverage. And those are also working in partnership with the groups that you see here, as well as others, to say, if you want the kind of timeline and the performance reliability that you're expecting as a customer, the timeline compression requires that you have those level of pre-configurations in mind. And it's a forcing function for that. On the other side, it's the fact that we're inventing things as an ecosystem in parallel. So when it comes to deploying a 600 kilowatt rack, I know Brian is no doubt developing solutions that support that 600 kilowatt rack. And likewise on the electrical side, how do we power that reliably without creating an opportunity for an arc flash? So, we're all kind of operating in parallel, and that allows us to think differently as well.
Absolutely perfect. Andrew, we're going to have to come back to you, especially really on that cooling. How you're rethinking everything is great. So, what's going to happen, Tom. I'm turning to you, my friend. But the big one is I want to thank you for the greatest name of a company. And if folks don't know their Greek history and mythology, forget it. They're losing it. But to you, please, Tom, an introduction of yourself and the company. And boy, what are you hearing and seeing?
Thank you, Stephen. Tom Zadera. I'm with Daedalus Industrial. We are a engineering, manufacturing, and installation arm of industrial control solutions. So we provide automation and custom, we'll say BMS and EPMS solutions for data centers. And what we're seeing now is a scale that I don't think any of us ever thought the data center would turn into, industry would turn into. As you mentioned, 10 megawatt data centers are large. Now we're talking about multiple gigawatts within a campus environment. And so in order for us to help our clients scale, there are many different factors in consideration, but really, trying to help standardize on a design that you can repeat many times over. I think that's a core task that our team is working on today.
We're having a reset.
It's helping folks come up with a framework that allows them to use multiple different hardware solutions so they still have optionality as far as where the supply chain is going to come from, but ultimately having enough runway from a manufacturing standpoint that all the materials can show up on time. And so how do we come up with a framework that allows them to control all of their necessary process equipment, all your mechanical, all your electrical gear? Our systems have to talk to, visibly see, and make the operator smarter inside the facility. So it's an interesting time to be in the control space surrounding the data center vertical. There's some major themes that we're seeing as far as our client base moving into more industrial utility grade PLC architecture systems. And we're now seeing, the addition of these major systems, right? Take your chiller plant of yesterday and add a technical process water loop, and then add an on-site power generation element to what your operators have to control. And so the systems are gaining in complexity, and it's not slowing down. And so, there's the need for partnerships in this group to figure out how we're going to connect, what we're going to look at, and how we can use this software and these tools to get smarter at the job site.
Tom, you really seem to, this complexity is just getting worse in the industry. Are you hearing this from a lot of your customers also, that they can't deal with the complexity? They need more of your help in this area?
There's a lot of folks that are undergoing, we'll say, portfolio-wide engineering standardization. right? And so maybe not a one size fits all, but coming up with a standard framework that's simply repeatable. Because if you're going to benchmark buildings from one to the next, and you're using different iterations of software or different lineups of equipment, it becomes very challenging for you to really measure them against one another, without using standard metrics like PUE and WUE. How is it that you're going to control these buildings differently, knowing that they're now 5 and 10x the size of data center controls from 10 years ago?
That's a big change. Brian, I've got to turn it to you now. Bit of an intro, of course, to help us with Stoltz for sponsoring this wonderful session and conversation. But Brian, what are you as Stoltz, one of the greatest global suppliers in this industry, seeing and hearing? Please let us know, sir.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Really appreciate being here with you, Stephen, and as well as these other panelists. I'm Brian Hatmaker. I'm president of Stoltz ATS, the U.S. North American arm of Stoltz. We're a global privately held company, and we specialize in precision cooling for data centers and AI factories and anything mission critical. This is my 32nd year in the industry, and it's predominantly been spent around precision cooling. And what we're seeing now is, probably the third or fourth revolution in my career, but certainly the most dynamic. And there's a massive shift underway. We kind of teased it a little bit with the title of this panel, and that's the shift from commercial to industrial grade or even utility grade, depending on how you're thinking about it. And of course, when you're moving at the velocity that the industry is, and you're making this shift to industrial scale, you start to see some changes in topology. You start to see a lot more risk come into the business, and you really have to start relying more on strong partnerships, trusted relationships, because there's a lot of new people in the industry, a lot of new brands and logos, and people moving around more so than they ever have before, and that leads to a lot of great disruption and creativity. And we start to see, for example, our cooling topology change, a much bigger shift towards liquid, obviously. But, we have a ways to go here where we're riding that air, liquid, hybrid wave. And every customer, depending on their application, seems to have a slightly different take on that. And so, when we're working with customers early on, and even, through the life cycle of the sale and support, we're seeing people that really require us to lean in, to really start holistically working with them from day one, and having a lot more engineering, a lot more application, a lot more product development, R&D, testing, and supply chain resiliency to be able to support these massive builds that they're doing at scale.
Brian, I got to ask, you brought in the word trusted partnerships. That's really, we've got all these new players coming in, how do you develop that trust? How do you get that trust? How do you have that trust? Come on, this is complex, as you've all said, but I'm going to hit you back with this one, Brian. You even said it many times in this industry. Time is money. Trust is money. How do you get to that?
Right. Well, look, there's no, you can't substitute for experience, but you also have to understand that there's a lot of great new ideas coming into the industry, and marrying those two things up can be absolutely brilliant. But you have to partner yourself with people that have been there and done it before, have seen each of these evolutions, and then can help you navigate the risk associated with the one that we're going through now. And so for us, it's we've seen it. We've been there through the maturation cycles as we've gone from completely different looking data centers over the decades to what we're looking at now with these AI factories and massive cloud centers. It really is truly a different game that we're trying to play right now, and the stakes are even higher than they've ever been.
Okay, Zach, that has got to be the best opening I've ever heard from Brian to you. The stakes have never been higher. How do you deal with that risk? Let me just turn you to this whole thing. We're in a resource-constrained world, but how do you deal with these risks? How do you get to good? How do you get to your success? Help me here, Zach.
I think it's all just taking a mindset that multiple other industries have made the shift prior. Automotive, oil and gas, you name it, have really gone through and said, okay, we're no longer designing this very specific thing. We're now manufacturing it. right? We're moving to that industrial grade. And so you start looking at all of the key components, not just, equipment and services, but you're looking at capital and people and any type of support that you need as raw materials, right? And you say, okay, well, I'm going to put all these raw materials into my machine and I'm going to produce a widget. And in this case, the widget happens to be a data center, right? And so, and then in many cases, we're now changing the definition into data center and maybe AI factory. Like, Brian, I love that you called it that, because I think that's what we're going to start seeing. And so when you start looking at it in an industrial way, you start seeing things that you didn't see before, right? Or you start taking a go-to-market kind of strategy to where you're saying, okay, here are my raw materials, here's how I'm managing them, and I'm trying to now meet this really interesting conundrum of I have hardware intersecting with the development of software, where I'm trying to now hit this ridiculous timeline. And I say ridiculous because we're all pushing it, and it's okay that it's ridiculous, but we're doing it. And so we're trying to hit that intersection point, and it's a moving target. And that's what makes it difficult and why you need the partnerships we've been referencing.
Absolutely critical. I like that. But gotta ask, Zach, how do you get from this commercial scale to this industrial utility scale? How do you think about that? How do you think about getting through this change?
1 megawatt at a time, right? What's the fastest way to get to a gigawatt? 1 megawatt at a time. And we really have to sit down with our partners and break it down to that, right? And I think we've gotten to a point now to where people are slipping back into what we used to do back in, we'll call it 2016, 2017, where everybody goes on the mission to simplify and standardize, right? Well, things are moving so fast, right? Standardizing is almost a double-edged sword, right? You could standardize on the wrong thing, make the wrong bet, right? But what we should really be focusing on is, what are we manufacturing now, right? And partnering in and scoping that in so where we say, okay, we're developing into this variance, right? And so, okay, within this variance, this is the timeline we can hit. These are the partners we're going to use. This is the widget we're going to create. And if we can all sit down and agree upon that, we're going to hit these schedules. We're gonna make these timelines, and we're gonna turn our ATM machine on a lot faster.
Perfect point. Andrew, I saw you nodding, and I know you were like, he's talking my language. I'm turning it to you, friend. That was genius, Zach, in that entry. You guys are great. Andrew, how do you deal with this now? You guys at FlexNode are really dealing with the cutting edge every day. The latest, you have customers are just dreaming stuff up for your help. But how do you get to success, Andrew? And how do you can you deal with that industrial to commercial scale that Zach was talking about? Is it possible?
I think it introduces a number of questions which are really exciting for the industry as a whole. And Zach put it really well. We need to start making decisions faster and stop looking at those decisions as something that we're going to the grave with a site that's going to be a permanent site and a forever data center. Right? We know that if you're waiting as long as a lot of groups want to in the 6, 9, 12-month design cycles, right? You're talking about entire iterations of NVIDIA platforms that are being rolled out at the following GTC, where all of us are sort of looking right back at the drawing board and making new decisions. So it's about, how do we start making those decisions faster in a factory-like manner? From the other side, though, it's really interesting in the workforce of construction, where oftentimes construction will do everything that it possibly can to go against standardization because that's where money is made. And so if we try to start actively fixing problems that have been pretty standardized and tried and true on the 60 previous data center projects that we've seen, yet we still receive a change order for it because one thing or another led to it. So when looking at that, it's also about how do we work with partners, as Brian well put it, that are willing to trust you and you can trust them to actually come to the table and solve problems rather than going into arbitration or splitting the baby beforehand in a claim, right? Because a large part of why we haven't, as a construction industry, been able to move as heavily over into an industrialized mindset is because in the construction industry, it's like risk hot potato, right? The architect has an incentive, the engineer has an incentive, the contractor has an incentive, the integrator, the operator, everybody has differing incentives. And yet now what we're running into is a North Star, which is this AI factory paradigm shift, where everybody has a singular incentive around speed. It's just sort of how we define that within our own parameters. And the biggest factor is coming together and having those conversations with trusted partners earlier.
Fantastic. Tom, I need to turn to you because this is something you've promoted for the longest time is get to me early, get you guys early for help. But how do you do that with customers? How can we get to success here with all these resource constraints? But more importantly, Tom, one thing that you've always been talking about is this whole idea of standardization and modular building, getting it right the first time and preparing. Talk to me, Tom. Help us out here. What should we be thinking?
Yeah, well, it's you mentioned a really good phrase there in modularity, and so you can think of that a couple different ways. One is completely build something before it gets sent to the job site as a building block, and so that's not an easy thing to do when it comes to a system like controls, right? There's a lot of parts, pieces, different devices. It's not just a box that gets delivered, and so one of the early projects that our company had success in was a large down and dirty retrofit project that nobody else wanted. And our company patented, we'll say, a product that delivers a modular control solution in a retrofit environment. So rather than working in the white space, it allows you we'll say the speed of deployment to drop a pod onto the roof of an existing site. And you can do a very, very streamlined cutover, which would allow you to turn on your new system and then slowly decommission the old, really streamlining the process from what would be months of commissioning down to, a week or two. So you think about that time and cost window of revenue generation from, a 6-month commissioning process down to maybe 4 weeks. If you take that application into a new construction environment, that's millions and millions of dollars that are associated with that cost schedule. And so we're now seeing customers and some of our best repeat partners are considering these for greenfield application, because we can have 80% of these building blocks done before they ever show up to the job site. It's pre-wired, it's pre-commissioned, and it shows up as a completed system. And so anything that we can take out of the critical path, not sending physical men and bodies to a job site, is a success for us, not just for Daedalus Industrial, but for the entire project schedule, through the general contractor and all the way up through the owner.
Hey, Tom, I wanted to jump in there for a second. Because I think there's something to add on to that. It's interesting, and Andrew touched on it as well. The earlier that customers can bring not just these dynamic requirements that we realize are going to change along the way, and we have to be flexible and have the capacity to serve them. We need to know about their challenges, their limitations, and what trade-offs they're going to be willing to make along the way. Because look, let's face it, whenever we're building out infrastructure, the trade-offs are pretty known. It's power, it's space, it's capacity. And so what are you willing to trade off to get, what's the most valuable thing that you need to get out of that design? And the one thing that we see a lot here is that we really try to encourage customers to share with us where they're struggling, right? Not only what they want to build, but what they're struggling with that's holding them back from being able to build it.
And Brian, what are they struggling with? What do you hear? Can you tell us, or is it a secret?
Yeah, those three things that I just mentioned is primarily it. It's space, power, and capacity. And unfortunately, physics doesn't bend. So we all have to play by the same rules there. But understanding, having gone through the iteration so many times, we really do have a good understanding as to how to best serve them. And a lot of times, operators or their construction and design partners are moving at the speed of light also, and they are very reliant on technical teams to help them find the right solution quickly. So turning to trusted resources and technical teams to help them get through that process early is great, because here's the one thing we all know: you can't gain lost time that you lose in the beginning of a project. You never make it back up. I don't care what anybody tells you. So the quicker we can get to the challenges and the limitations and those trade-offs that you're willing to make early in the design process, when we're thinking about what kind of topology we want to put out there, knowing that it might change a little bit along the way, it helps us get to a point where we can start to mitigate other risks, like gaining line of sight for the long lead items, like lining up flexible capacity that could be long-term. right? And so we know that we might see some bill of material changes in there. We know that we might see some form factor changes in there. But if we can, understand what that capacity is going to look like long term, you can start to think of it in those terms instead of, how many boxes am I going to put an order against?
Right. Time to deploy, cost to deploy, continuous redesigns and changes. You're not making things sound better or easier, that's for sure. And I want to go back to what Andrew said. I love this. Risk is like a hot potato. Just pass it around to the next loser. You win. So I got to ask Zach, how do you deal with all these multiple things at once? And then each of you throw in human beings. There's not enough. The right people, who said experience? One of you. You brought that up and destroyed an entire conversation. Beautiful. Zach, what are you doing to succeed? How do you make people succeed?
If we had the answer to that, we'd be retired, right? But no, I mean, on the journey from dirt to data, everything changes, right? We're at the center of industrial manufacturing and construction, which we all know is a recipe for fun. I'll put it that way, right? Quote unquote fun. And because of that, we have a lot of not only organizations, but a lot of personalities and a lot of experience, which is good. But I think something that we're all wrapping our heads around is what got us here is not going to get us there, right? And so we have to start looking at things differently, right? And we have to approach them differently. And we can sit here all day long and say partnerships. Well, what does that really mean? Well, it means flexibility, and it means transparency, and it means honesty, right? So we've been in design cycles here recently over the 18 months that went from a 50 megawatt data center and then to an 80 to 100 to now 180 plus megawatt data center for the same customer, right? And you're like, okay, well, how do you manage that not only from a construction cycle, right, a design cycle, but also from a key partner on the OEM side to support that properly? The answer is it's damn near impossible. I mean, we're doing it because we have great partners, right? But at the end of the day, I think that's the biggest thing, that bigger is not always better. And I think that's where the market is starting to understand that really quickly, is that it's not the race to go see who can go build the biggest, baddest Death Star, right? People are starting to say like, okay, that sucks, and there's a lot of risk, and that potato's going around real fast, right? And it keeps coming back into my basket, and I don't want that. And so I think people are starting to see that you need to go not smaller, just more focused, right? And so sweet spot, 40 to 60, maybe a little bit bigger megawatts, because that's when construction cycles are a lot more predictable, right? Supply chains are more predictable. Design cycles are short enough to where you can, Andrew had a great point, right? By the time you go build this Death Star, 5 different chipsets have come out, right? Well, hey, if we shorten that down, we get much more concentrated. You can manage that risk a lot easier, and you can manage incentives with your partners a lot easier as well. And I think that's something that we haven't talked about yet, which is very interesting.
No, perfect point. Andrew, I'm turning it over to you because this was great in terms of what you're doing now. You're seeing this all the time with clients constantly changing designs or upscaling or new changes. You brought it up. There's new reference architectures. Andrew, how do you deal with the customers, these resource constraints, these staffing issues? Are you going modular? Are you changing your design build? What are you doing? Tell us what you're up to.
So we're focused primarily on kind of a unique approach for offsite construction and modular prefab, where we're working together with the broader construction industry to leverage their capacities for their offsite construction, where we recognize that in order to deploy capacities flexibly in certain jurisdictions, we also have to go into those jurisdictions with partners that have the certifications and requirements to provide services in those jurisdictions. So, there's a layer of, call it localization, that's happening to enable agility, and also including the fact that all of the large construction firms are basically seconded to the large hyperscalers or developers. So going to that top 5 construction firm that does data center work may not be the easiest path from A to B. And so looking at ways to create unique teams and create trusted relationships where you can continue to go back to partners you trust is a huge factor there. The other side, I will say, is needing to push back on customers a lot more when it comes to decisions that may have ripple effects through the project. It's easy to say, yes, 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 we can. But at the end of the day, what you run into is a technical team that's like, do you realize that we're now 6, 9, 18 months delayed because this slight tweak sent us in a completely different design direction? And so in part, it's about sort of, I think, being much more transparent with your customers. But the other side, as Zach put it, is kind of let's boil it down to what you really need right now and the performance that you need within those 4 walls. And let's deploy that much faster so that once we're done with that, it's sort of like an anti-fragile approach. Now we know some of the things that we really want and we can reinforce. And there are other things that we're going to change with a team that we trust. So,
yeah, that was great. Just even the way Zach put that, we got to talk about incentives. What's driving them? What's pushing them? What's making them? I love that. Tom, to you, what are you guys doing to get these folks to move faster, move better? You talked about moving to modularization. You talked about new ideas in construction also. Tom, you're really cutting out some new ideas here. How do you get your customer buy-in? Are they under so much stress they've got new incentives the way Zach told us?
I think we work backwards from what we think the deadlines are going to look like. And so if we know that our clients have, a variable designs, I think the first question, a conversation we have is around change management and how our clients look at changes and the design and change iteration that happens throughout, from the first initial concept discussion to, hey, I need these things delivered to us, within the next week. And you can't be making changes along the way. And so our firm has developed an in-house tool that we use. Initially started as a kind of a quoting mechanism for us, but over time we have built on this tool, and it really, we're kind of, drinking some of our own sauce here, where we're using some of the AI elements and some of the kind of wizard functions that allow us to, immediately produce drawing sets and engineering packages with clients in hours of what takes some people, weeks and months to perform. And so by using and leveraging some of these new AI tools within our business, we're able to really streamline, activities that took months in past to what may take a few hours or days now in the front side of the planning process. And so now that we have a finalized product and a design and a plan forward, then it gives you a lot more flexibility in the hard stuff, which is the manufacturing, because then you're dealing with your supply chain, your components, and really organizing, your execution path of not only getting it out of your shop, but making sure that the job site's ready to accept the materials when they all show up. So it all has to happen in unison. But I think managing the change management system for the client and understanding where their tolerances are and putting really tight caps around that is really key to success.
Got it. Yeah, almost even back to Zach's whole point of how do you schedule the success? How do you look at the success, but start where you need to. Nice. Brian, to you, please, can I ask, how is industry using this? How can industry get better use out of all these ideas? This idea of modularization, standardization, but getting in early. How early is early, my friend? That sounds like...
It's never too early. It's never too early, right? It's like there's never a good time to sign a bad contract. It's never too early to get started in a data center build, right? What I can say about that is, as we start to think about removing complexity from all aspects of these builds, industrial goes better when it's less complex. And although I think it's easy to say, well, we'll just standardize everything, I think there are portions of it that we can standardize. There's other things that really do require us to kind of, tailor our solutions to the customer requirements, and we see it every day. But there's a slippery slope there, because the more tailored, the more custom you become with a solution, the more risk you're starting to introduce into your supply chain. Because if you just continue to over-engineer some of these solutions, you end up with, at a component level or a feature level, something that's so specific or so proprietary that, it can put you either at a cost disadvantage. It can force you to have to buy outside of North America and perhaps incur some tariff risk. It could also, really limit you to the number of vendors that you have that you can work with, or that we as an OEM could potentially work with. And we like to give our customers as many options as we can. So what we like to do is, as early as possible, we like to tell people, look, we can go as far down this customization road as you'd like to go, but understand that there's going to be trade-offs as you go down it. And if you're going to get specific, if you're going to try to squeeze every nth of capacity or space or efficiency out of something, it's more than likely that you're going to end up with different aspects of your design, whether it's power or cooling or controls, that you're going to limit your options when it actually comes time to release that demand to your supplier partners and their downstream suppliers. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have as many options as we can, that we're forecasting demand as far out as we can to those supplier partners that we have downstream. And so they have a great chance, if not a perfect chance, to help us deliver the project on time with great quality and exactly the way the customer wants it.
That's really interesting.
I brought up something really important, Brian, just around transparency, right? Understanding how a client is going to be building the next building, but what does the next 2 years look like, 3 years down the road? If you only have visibility to project 1 and not project 35 that they're also working on, and they're going to need your help in down the road, it's really, really important to find the right partners that can give you a level of transparency, to give you a couple of years worth of forecasts so you can really plan your business for success.
Great one. Zach, I'm turning it back to you because you brought up so much before. You got to get it out, my friend. I mean, you had incentives there. You had Tom's major point that he just brought up, the right partner. Okay. Where do you go? It's like opening up a bank and you let the bank robber in. Zach, how do you get to these incentives? How do you get to the right mixture of all these elements? Because, Zach, it's up and down the supply chain, to Brian's point. What do you do?
It is. And this is, this will be a spicy take, so I'll apologize in advance. But, a lot of people will be in positions where they have to hit the easy button. And you want to talk about the robber. The robber is the easy button because the people that are behind that button are not incentivized the way that you are, right? Unfortunately. And it's not that they're taking advantage of you, but that's just how that they built their business, right? And that's how that they're approaching the market. And that's how they've seen success, right, previously. And there's different models to building what we're calling a data center or an AI factory, right? And I think the incentive is very important because what are we doing? It's obviously a hot potato of risk is great, but when you really look at risk, it's just a sliding scale, right? And it's great. When you move this, you get this. When you pull lever A, doors C and D open, right? And so it's working with, and this is what differs between a transactional relationship, right? Where, you call yourself partners, but you don't share those forecasts and you don't share what's coming on the pipeline and you don't co-develop products, right, together. Because that's what's wrong too, is that, and we've said this earlier, is people are incentivized to go grab as much profit as they can. They might not be incentivized to be the best partner that they can be, even though that will give them more long-term success collectively than it will for that one specific product or that one specific project. And I think that's where, when we're coming together as partners, we have to start having that mindset. And the ones that I think will be viewed as quote unquote successful in the near future and in the distant future are the ones that capture that, and the ones that don't will be the ones that get consolidated and bought up here shortly.
Really great point. Beautiful. Andrew, I'm turning it to you wherever you want on this one. They seem to be using your hot potato example too well.
Yeah, I think one of the things related to incentives is also looking across the value chain to where those incentives end up as a big driver for your project, right? So let's go back to the smaller size on the deployment scale perspective, right? Let's look at it then from the utilities perspective, right? Of the utilities in the country, and looking at probably 3,000 of them, there are probably sub 20 that have 500 megawatts or more within their portfolio. So when you look at the incentives driving how the nation's different grid operators work, right? It's a non-starter for most of them to even think about the scale of 3, 4, 500 megawatt capacities. Now, I'm not saying that it's unheard of. It's certainly happening. It's happening in many different locations across the country. But when you look at a conventional utility, if you look at a co-op and you say, hey, let's talk about 100 megawatts, you're talking about a 20-year outlook for that group within an organization that may be no larger than 15 people. And so we're talking about, incentives that also are, hey, what's the likelihood that this goes belly up? And then I have to explain to my other utility users why they're footing the bill for something that's so major. Now, there have been now much better ways to counteract that earlier, but it's a good example of how we're starting to look at the process to deploy and all of the different ways that incentives are taking place in the project.
Perfect. I mean, really perfect. How your perspective on it. Tom, to you, your insight, please, on this. And if you want to even take these incentives, because everyone has so many different ones, and you're dealing with all these different incentives from people. How you dealing with it?
Yeah, I think Brian used this term, moving farther and farther to the left with clients. So typically, controls is something that's been treated as the baby of a lot of the operators, and is really as many people are involved in the decision making chain. It's not the contractors, it's not the GC, it's not the owner's rep, right? It's usually a combination of your operations staff and the people that really run innovation at the client layer. They're going to decide what kind of software platforms and architecture that they're going to use, because they're deciding, how that's going to be scalable into whatever their future state of data centers is going to look like. And so they're realizing that, to design these systems, to deploy them, we need to be closer to it. And so instead of just deciding on a job by job basis, which controls historically has, it's very much followed the traditional channels, lagging behind some of the other kind of long lead items like the big fan walls and the big HVAC systems and your big generator equipment. I see controls are now starting to drift into that long lead type of category where people have specific ideas of where they want to go with it. And they're saying, here's the next 1 to 2 year runway of what our demand looks like, right? Here's the next 15 buildings that we need to produce, hundreds and thousands of control panels for. How can we sharpen this design? How can we reduce the amount of material going to the job site by 20%? How can we reduce the construction schedule by 20%? And so with all those ideas in mind, we have solutions internally that can say, we can do more in our factory, right? We can do pre-commissioning. We can send things out in a more finalized state before they ever hit your job site. And we're going to reduce the overall, manpower and labor force necessary to get this job done for you. So we're doing everything we can to maximize what our products look like before they leave our factory versus the traditional stance of ship it to the job site and hope the field team can get it done on time.
Just great. Sharpen design, sharpen what you're doing. Just absolutely brilliant. I'm going to ask you, Brian, your thoughts on this one, because quite honestly, this is huge. People are making big bets.
Yeah, we see that as well. And I just would maybe simplify it even further. If you want to know where the incentives are, follow the money. So if you look at where look at the contracts, right? Watch the liquidated damages, watch, what the penalties are, what the liabilities are. And it really does outline for you kind of where the risk is for the customer. And that, you can infer a lot from that. And so when we look at that, when we look at the scale of these projects, when you are dealing with a hyperscaler or an AI factory or someone that's perhaps doing procurement on their behalf, everybody's very aware that the stakes are much, much higher these days. And when it comes to making bets, it's not just on the customer and operator side. We've had to make our own bets here. We've had to, try to divine where this market's going, and with everything that's happening with a new administration in our government, and with tariff policy and tax policy, tax incentives, other types of investment incentives, onshoring. Last year, this time we were going down the path even before the election of siting a new factory in Texas, because we knew that it was going to become even more important for us to gain high capacity, high flexibility production capabilities in that region of the country and be able to support the customers that we have in the region. And you can't just stop there. Every year you have to be looking at how you're going to expand capacity, anticipating what that customer is going to need, and designing it in such a way that literally you can minimize your idle time, you can maximize your production lines and how many shifts you can run, because literally the demand is unlimited at this point. There's no one company out there, certainly not us, that is going to be able to support this market, by ourselves. And so we're all having to work together. There's a lot of, like I said, co-opetition out there at the moment. Still, fierce competition for jobs, but you find yourself working at times, where big customers are splitting orders to kind of spread their risk. And we're doing the same with our supply chain at times. And so, making big bets, making big investments, putting that money into our facilities, reinvesting it into our business so that we're prepared when the customer says go. We can ramp quickly and be able to deliver in very strong labor market locations around the country.
If I can,
I got to say, all of you are fantastic for making me sleep well at night and be happy. Okay, final thoughts. We're right at the end. I'm getting pulled on this one already. Zach, your final thoughts here. I'm going to put it the way Brian did. Time is money. And back to you, my friend, with those incentives, pal. What do we need to think at the end here? How do I work with you?
We've just broken record the partnership, but it's true, right? It's finding partners in the space that are willing to be uncomfortably transparent with you on both sides of the coin, right? And say that, hey, we're all trying to build the biggest, baddest thing, right? But we need to kind of draw a line in the sand and say, this is what we're really building, right? This is what we're really doing together. And I think the ones that are willing to do that will win. The ones that are not willing to do that will have harder times in the future, right? I feel like it's going to feel like the Oregon Trail a little bit, but that's where it is. True partners are true winners, and that's the last word from me.
Perfect. Andrew, to you, sir. Final thoughts. What do we need to do? How do I work with you? How do I get you?
Well, I think, one of the things that's just worthwhile to note here is the co-opetition point that is happening across the industry. I think oftentimes a lot of different building segments look at the construction industry as relatively unsophisticated because it hasn't adopted things like technologies as well as other industries have. But let's not kid ourselves. The construction industry is about as sophisticated as it gets. And even with hundreds of thousands of people that make it up, millions technically, right, it talks a lot. And so when it comes to going and trying to work with construction firms in such a way where they're not partners, where you're almost creating an antagonistic relationship with those construction firms, it surfaces very quickly. And those are the groups that actually are partners with their designers and their builders and their suppliers are the groups that are going to get the call back. The groups that screw over their builders and their suppliers and their designers are going to be the ones that we wait to respond to.
Great. Tom, to you, sir. Your final thoughts on this whole thing and how do you drive success, my friend?
I become the only person in the family that really understands what this digital economy really is, right? Explaining to, friends and family members of, what are these data centers and what are they serving and what is the purpose of all these long hours that we're all logging in on. It comes back to a very human element, right? Where, if I look across the industry and the people that I have my deepest partnerships with, I can say I've known Brian Hatmaker for, over 15 years. I probably crossed paths with Zach, maybe 10 years ago. And so, as big and as bold and as much money is flowing into this marketplace, it still comes down to core groups of people that have been doing this for a long time who, are really at the forefront of making a lot of these really exciting projects come to life. And so we're really excited about it. We've never been busier than we are today, and I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. So we're excited to see where this market's going.
And you hear the word trust again and again from you, Tom. That is so special, so wonderful here. Great. Brian, to you, final thoughts. Big appreciation to Salt for sponsoring this session.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and thanks, everybody. I guess what I would say is I don't need to tell anybody on this panel or you, Stephen, how, at how much velocity and scale we're seeing out of data centers now. What I like to tell people is that, the data center world hasn't actually gotten any bigger, but it's gotten a lot more populated, and that world is spinning a lot faster than it ever has before. And so we have to start getting creative, right? You need kind of the old heads that have been around, done it a while, have seen different iterations of what the data center industry is, but then those people need to be able to partner with some of the new faces, the new logos, the new brands, the disruptors that are coming into this. And they need to welcome that, and they need to find creative ways of bringing that kind of trusted, proven way of doing things, and then adapting it so that it is really poised for enabling their success going forward. So you want Sherpas, not spectators, when it comes to helping these new faces that are coming into the industry and trying to do these incredible builds, the scale and velocity of which we've never seen before. And so you need a guide, but you don't want that guide to be just trying to employ the old methods to get you there. You want them to be open and creative and willing to co-innovate and work with you to enable your success and get those that critical infrastructure online, on time, every time.
Perfect. Zach, Andrew, Tom, Brian, you're the best. Great topic needed right now. I'm going to tell everybody to reach out to you as soon as possible, like now. And with that, I'm going to say also to Stoltz, thank you so much for this wonderful innovation day. Guys, you're the best. Much appreciation for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Glad to be here.
Fantastic. And with that, I'm going to say, don't forget, lots of resources. Reach out for the greatest people in this industry, needed now, and pass on that hot potato. Get to them. With that, I've got to say, don't forget, next session for this Stoltz Innovation Day, top of the hour. With that, thanks for joining us.